Welcome to Project Healthy Schools. This is Lesson 9, Facts on Fat. Lesson objectives for Lesson 9. Students will be able to understand how fat intake plays a role in our health, understand there are differences between fat sources, and that research is evolving to help us determine which fat sources are considered healthy and unhealthy. Distinguish between the following types of fat, unsaturated and saturated. Evaluate a fast food meal and determine ways to improve it. Vocabulary for this lesson: unsaturated fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, sodium, artery, and plaque. Hello everybody, and welcome back to Project Healthy Schools. This is Lesson 9, where we'll be talking about facts on fat. Before we get going with Lesson 9, let's review Lesson 8, where we talked about the strategies that companies use to advertise to promote their products. And we learned how to kind of evaluate those things and make decisions for ourselves whether what is being advertised was actually true or not. We also created our own healthy ad during that lesson. And we talked about screen time and how too much time in front of a screen does two things. It exposes us to a lot of advertisements, which may not always be good. And it also really cuts down on our physical activity time. Now, I showed you a 5-pound fat model back in Lesson 5 when we talked about our heart and the importance of physical activity. So it's easy to sometimes think that fat is always bad, but fat is actually a really important part of our body, and certain kinds of fat are actually essential to our body's health. Does anybody know some healthy foods that we can get a healthy source of fat from? Let's take a look at these. Avocados are really high in healthy fats, as well as things like salmon, olive oil and olives, and nuts and seeds. These are all great sources of fat that help our body. Let's talk a little bit about in what ways this fat helps our body. So as we talked about before, fat is a macronutrient. It's one of the 3 main macronutrients our body needs. The others were protein and carbohydrates, but we do need some fat in our body for these reasons. Healthy fats help our body to function properly, absorbing and transporting vitamins around our body. Healthy fats keep our hair and our skin looking great. We need to have a certain amount of healthy fat in our body to keep our skin looking good and our hair healthy. Some fats might protect us from heart disease. So a certain amount of fat in our diet in the right ways can actually protect our heart and not hurt it. We need healthy fat stores in our body to cushion our organs. So we need a little bit of fat in our body to keep our organs safe. So how do we know the difference between this healthy fat and not so healthy fat? Well, we're going to help you with that right now. The healthy fat that we're talking about is called unsaturated fat. So the definition of unsaturated fat is a healthy fat that helps the body absorb and transport vitamins, protect organs and cells, and lower bad cholesterol. Like we talked about, examples include nuts, seeds, peanut butter, avocados, olives, olive oil, canola oil, and fish. So we are encouraged to eat more of these foods without worrying about them being stored and negatively affecting our health. Now, what about the bad fat? What's the fat that we need to watch out for? Well, this is called saturated fat. So if you look on the back of your nutrition label, you will always see both of these broken down. You'll see how much fat is in it total, but you'll see how much of that is unsaturated and how much it's saturated. So the definition of saturated fat is an unhealthy fat that leads to higher levels of bad cholesterol, which over time can lead to heart disease and or stroke. Examples include animal fats like hamburger and steak, whole milk, butter, fried food, and a few plant oils including coconut oil, and palm kernel oil. Eating these foods once in a while is okay, but we want to limit this in our diet, just like when we talked about sugar. A little bit's okay here and there, but it's something we want to watch out for and make sure that we're not consuming too much of. Let's talk a little bit about the word cholesterol. Have you heard that word before? I bet you have, and that's our next vocab word. Cholesterol is a fatty substance that is necessary in your body. There are 2 types of cholesterol in your body. So just like there was 2 types of fats, one's kind of good and one's considered not so good, same thing here. What we call HDL is the good cholesterol in our body. And it's the cholesterol that is considered to help us, and it helps prevent heart disease by removing and helping to break down bad cholesterol. So the awesome part is that by consuming healthy fats, we build our HDL, which actually fights against the LDL and helps lower it. So having more HDL is good having a lot of LDL is bad. So what is LDL cholesterol? Well, LDL is considered the bad cholesterol. Too much of it increases the risk of heart disease. And this is what we talk about can lead to plaque building up in our arteries. And we'll talk about that, and I'll show you guys that in a little bit. Consuming too much saturated fat and sodium can impact our health in negative ways. So have any of you heard of the word of sodium? Well, sodium is another name for salt. And that's another one of our vocab words. So sodium is a mineral that is added to foods for preservative or flavoring purposes. So our body does need some sodium to keep it healthy. It keeps our electrolytes in balance. But most of us eat way too much of it. Most of the foods that we eat are high in salt, even if we don't realize it. So we want to really watch our sodium intake. Statistically, 15% of sodium comes from the actual salt shaker, and 75% of it comes from the highly processed foods that we eat sometimes. So let's talk a little bit about arteries and plaque buildup. Well, an artery, they're the hollow tubes that carry oxygenated blood from the heart to the body. So as our heart pumps, arteries carry the blood away from the heart and circulate it through our body and deliver all the nutrients that we need. Now, what is plaque? Well, plaque is the fatty deposits that develop over time inside artery walls that can cause health problems. Eating too much of the bad fats, having too high of the bad cholesterol can lead to problems. Now, when we're born, our arteries are smooth without any plaque in them. So take a look at this model. As you can see in number 1, it's completely clear and there's no plaque buildup at all. Now, as we progress to the next artery, we notice there's a little bit of plaque buildup there. Well, how did that plaque get there? Well, eating too much bad cholesterol or too much saturated fat or things like smoking can lead to damage in the artery wall, which allows some cholesterol and some of that bad stuff to get inside the artery. Now, the body responds to that by trying to get it out, and it goes in and cells go inside and try to get that bad stuff out of the arteries. But after that's done, the cells leave a residue called plaque. So if we eat too many unhealthy things and our cells need to go and constantly fix our arteries, over time, more and more plaque builds up. Take a look at number 3 now. The model in number 3, as you can tell, we have a problem. There's only a little bit of space for the blood to move through. Eventually, if you're an adult, you develop more and more plaque if you continue to have bad habits. If you improve your habits and make healthier changes, you can slow down or stop the growth of plaque. Now, as you can see in 4, there's a very small hole moving through the artery. And this is becoming a bigger and bigger problem. Now, sometimes that plaque stops growing and it kind of grows in and out of the way of the blood. But if we get this much blockage, we run into a big risk of a piece of plaque possibly breaking off somewhere and clogging that little hole. And when this happens, blood cannot get from our heart through the artery and it becomes clogged. And this is where we could have what we call a heart attack. And if this happens up in our brain, it's what we call a stroke. This can result in things as bad as death. But we can improve our risk of having that happen by having healthy habits and changing some of the things that we eat and changing how much we exercise and move as we grow up into adulthood. As we've been talking about throughout all of these lessons is the importance of building healthy lifelong habits. This is especially apparent in this lesson when we talk about the risks that our arteries have of clogging with plaque and what too much fat in our bodies and the wrong kind of fat and cholesterol in our bodies can put us at risk for something as serious as a heart attack or a stroke. So it's important to know what our healthy habits should be, but it's also important to know what we should be avoiding throughout our life. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things we want to avoid and some of the unhealthy choices that can cause these things later in life. Well, hopefully we know that smoking is the number 1 thing to avoid as far as our heart health goes. Smoking is the number 1 cause of heart disease and one of the number 1 killers in the United States. So we want to for sure limit our smoking. But having high blood pressure, diabetes, too much stress or not eating enough food, drinking too much alcohol, not eating enough fruits and vegetables, not getting enough exercise, or not sleeping enough are all things that can negatively contribute to our heart health and the health of our arteries. So speaking of healthy habits, now would be a good time to pause this lesson. So let's get up and move around for this lesson's brain break. Okay, for today's brain break, I'm going to talk to you about flexibility. Now, flexibility is the ability for our certain parts of our body to move through their full range of motion. And flexibility can be improved. If you're not very flexible or certain parts of your body don't move very well, we can improve that through stretching. Now, what we're going to do today is called static stretching. Static stretching is when we are holding still, which is different than dynamic stretching, is when we kind of warm up the body and move it through its existing range of motion. Static stretching can be done at any time, but it's especially good to do after physical activity when your body is already loose and warm. Now I'm going to talk to you about the sit and reach stretch today. Now this is a stretch you might recognize from your PE classes. This is one that they sometimes test. Now the reason it's important is because it's stretching our hamstrings and our lower back muscles. And by keeping those things flexible, we're going to improve our chances of not having lower back problems when we get older, which is a very common thing for people that lose this flexibility. All right. Now it's important to understand that we don't want to be totally uncomfortable when we do this, but at the same time, when we're stretching, we should feel a little bit of something. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is sit on the floor like me. We're going to keep our legs nice and straight. All right. And we're going to find where that existing range of motion is. So just taking your hands and let them slide up your knees. Now, if you're starting to feel a stretch at this point, this is about where you're going to be. Now, if you can keep it going to your shins. And if you can go to your toes, go ahead. All right. Now, when we stretch, our breathing is really important. So I want you we're going to do this stretch for 3 sets of 20 seconds. Now we're going to go to where we feel the first stretch for the first 10. And after 10 seconds, we're going to take a deep breath in. And as we exhale, we're going to try to stretch the stretch out a little further for the last 10 seconds. All right, and then we're going to rest in between. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and get to where we feel like we can stretch for 10 seconds. Ready? Go. Deep breath in. Go ahead and relax. Now, hopefully you noticed that little bit of extra stretch you could get with that deep breath. All right, let's do that again. All right, starting at our first spot for 10 seconds. Ready? Go. Deep breath in. And relax. We're going to do it one more time. Go ahead and shake them out. Go into our first spot first for 10 seconds. Ready? Go. Deep breath. All right, go ahead and let's get back to our lesson. Welcome back. So we're going to do an activity today. We're going to be talking about fat, and we're specifically going to be talking about the fat content in fast food. So I'm sure all of us have had fast food at one time or another. Is fast food necessarily good for you? Well, the answer is it depends on what you order. Some fast food restaurants have some healthier choices, and if we choose wisely, we can actually eat fairly healthy even when we're eating fast food. But normally, what does fast food typically have a lot of? Well, a lot of times there's a lot of added sugar, and there's definitely a lot of added fat, lots of creamy sauces, things that are really high in saturated fat. What doesn't it have? Well, oftentimes they don't have a lot of selection. Like we said, some food chains offer some healthy options, but usually they're pretty limited. So that becomes the problem. But why do we eat fast food? Well, as Americans, we typically eat fast food out of convenience because it's quick and easy, and we kind of have a busy lifestyle, and oftentimes we do it because of that. And while we know it's not the healthiest choice, fast food restaurants are not going away, and sometimes it's hard to avoid. And oftentimes we might be in a situation where we need to eat at a fast food restaurant. So we're going to use fast food as the example today to help us break down and maybe analyze the food choices that we make. So maybe the next time you go to a fast food restaurant, you can make a healthier choice. I want you to think back to the lesson when we talked about my plate. Does anyone remember how many calories per day a 12-year-old person needs? Well, hopefully remember that that number varies. It depends on several things. It depends on how physically active you are, what your size is, and even what your gender is. So obviously, it's going to be different for everybody. Now that number is going to always change, especially while you're growing, because we're constantly getting bigger and our body actually needs more calories when we're growing. But on average, we can give you kind of a range. So the average 12-year-old needs between 1,600 and 2,400 calories per day. And they need to consume less than 22 milligrams of sodium and under 65 grams of fat. So we want to keep those numbers in mind as we move into this activity. Now to get ready for this activity, you're going to need to get a couple things together. And some of these are optional. I'm going to do the activity for you so you can simply watch, but I would like you to try to follow along and calculate some of these things yourself. So if you could download or print the McDonald's nutrition facts handout, that's going to be helpful in calculating some of these things. Now I'm going to demonstrate using Crisco. You could also follow along and do this if you wanted, but I'm going to give you a visual representation of the amount of fat in some items. So to do this, if you wanted to grab some butter or Crisco, if it's okay with your parents to use, and maybe some paper plates, we can get started. So in this activity, we're going to analyze 2 example meals from McDonald's. All right, these meals are going to be meal 1 and meal 2, and we're going to give them names. So we're going to say Joey chose meal 1 and Jess chose meal 2. So let's take a look at these 2 meals. In meal 1, for Joey, he chose a 10-piece chicken nugget, medium fries, and a chocolate 12-ounce milkshake. This is a pretty typical thing to order when you're at a fast food restaurant. But let's take a look at Jess's meal. She's going to get a grilled chicken sandwich, apple slices, and fat-free chocolate milk. So we're going to take a look at both those meals and analyze several things. So the first thing I want you to do is, using your nutrition facts chart, look up how many calories, how much sodium, and how much fat is in each one of these meals. So take a look at each one of these food items and break it down into those 3 categories. Go ahead and pause the video and see what you come up with. All right, let's take a look at Jess's meal first. Remember, that was meal 2, which seemed like the more healthier option, but let's take a look. So Jess once again had a grilled chicken sandwich, some apple slices, and a fat-free chocolate milk. The grilled chicken sandwich had 350 calories, the apple slices 15, and the fat-free milk had 130, for a total of 495 calories. There was 820 milligrams of sodium in the grilled chicken sandwich, 0 in the apples, and 135 in the chocolate milk. Now, as far as fat goes, there was 9 grams, which is the same as 2 teaspoons of fat in her entire meal. Let's take a look at Joey's meal. Well, Joey's chicken nuggets had 470 calories, the medium fries 340, and the chocolate milkshake 560 calories, for a total of 1,370 calories. Look at the sodium. 900 milligrams of sodium in the nuggets, 190 in the fries, 240 milligrams in the chocolate milkshake, for a total of 1,330 milligrams. Now looking at the fat, there was 30 grams of fat in the chicken nuggets, 16 grams of fat in the medium fries, and 16 grams of fat in the chocolate milkshake, for a total of 62 grams. So we were right. We were most likely right. Jess's meal was a lot healthier. It was much lower in fat, much lower in sodium, and much lower in calories. So let's take a really closer look at the 2 meals side by side. So what do you notice about the difference between the 2 meals? Well, in meal 1, which was Joey's meal, has almost as many calories and fat as you need in one day. And it's higher in sodium, does not contain any fruit, almost no vegetables. The protein choice is fried. There's a lack of color, and there's a lack of fiber. And these are all things that we talked about in previous lessons, about how to choose our choices. When we talked about My Plate, we talked about the rainbow of color lesson. This meal is really lacking in that way. Let's take a look at meal 2. What do you notice about it? It has some added fat from the mayonnaise on the grilled chicken sandwich. But other than that, it's fairly low in calories and fairly low in sodium. Both of them have added sugar in the chocolate milk or the chocolate milkshake. And there's a lack of whole grain in both meals. So while Jess's meal is definitely a better choice, it's still not an ideal thing to eat often. So we're going to take a look at both of these meals side by side, and we're going to use Crisco today to demonstrate how much fat is actually in each of these meals. Now Crisco kind of looks like fat, and to be honest, Crisco is made mainly of fat, so it's a pretty good representation. So let's first start with, which was meal number 2, which was Jess's meal. It was a grilled chicken sandwich, apple slices, and fat-free chocolate milk. Well, the only thing that had fat in it was the grilled chicken sandwich because of the mayonnaise. And it had the equivalent of 2 spoonfuls. So let's take a look at this. Now, if you're doing this at home, it's kind of messy, but it's going to give us a good representation. So that entire meal, that's how much fat was in it. But let's move over here now to the first meal. Now, the chicken nuggets, the 10-piece of chicken nuggets, 7.5 teaspoons of fat. So hold on, this is going to take me a minute. Okay, that's about 7.5 teaspoons of fat. But now we also have the fries, which has about the same as 4 teaspoons of fat. So we can add that to our
plate.
And we're still not done. Now we have the milkshake, which adds another 4. So let's take a really close look at these side by side. So once again, Jess's meal, fat-free chocolate milk, which has 0 fat, apple slices, 0 fat, and then the grilled chicken sandwich, which has 2 spoonfuls of fat. So it's about a visual representation of how much fat would be in that meal. But let's move over here to meal number 1. Once again, the chocolate milkshake with 4 teaspoons of fat, the medium fries with 4 teaspoons of fat, and then we add the 10-piece nugget, which had a 7.5 teaspoons of fat, which is a total of this much fat. Notice the difference between a healthier choice and a not so healthy choice. So let's wrap up this lesson. What were some of the important things about having healthy fat in our body? Well, it helps keep our skin healthy, keeps our hair healthy, helps transport vitamins around the body, also acts as a protector for our organs, and it also is a good source of fuel for our body. So having some healthy fats and making sure we eat the right kind of fats is really important. What about making fast food choices? What did we learn today? Well, even though sometimes our options are limited, there are ways to reduce the amount of saturated and unhealthy fats, as well as sodium and total amount of calories in some of our fast food items, just by making some small choices, subbing things out, such as the soft drinks, or making choices to, if they offer a fruit or a vegetable, to try to get one of those instead of French fries or things like that. So we learned a little bit about that and how much difference those choices can make, especially in the fat content area. And as always, what can you share with someone else about this lesson? Maybe think about something that stuck out to you the most and share it with a family member. That's it for lesson 9. I'll be back in lesson 10 for the final PHS lesson. Have a great day.